My name is Jeremy Stevens. My project is going to focus on Fort Collins and examine the use of hydraulic fracturing and regulation at both the local and state level. The use of hydraulic fracturing, or commonly called fracking, is one of the most divisive environmental issues in Colorado and the United States. There are proponents who argue it has spurred industry, creates jobs, lowered carbon emissions, and provided an economic boon to many communities across the country, including Colorado. Opponents of fracking are worried about its effects on contaminating ground and surface water, polluting the air, and lack of oversight in the industry. This paper is going to explain hydraulic fracturing and the chemicals used in the process while examining the environmental concerns fracking has on drinking water. I'm going to discuss the voter-approved ban on fracking and fracking waste in Fort Collins and examine the subsequent Colorado Supreme Court decision that overturned that ban. I'm going to detail not only the concerns of hydraulic fracturing, but the actual spills and releases of oil and fracking fluids in Fort Collins. I'm first going to describe a brief history of Fort Collins. Fort Collins is located in northern Colorado, is about 60 miles north of Colorado's capital, Denver, and is about a 1-hour drive from it. The history of Fort Collins dates back to 1862 when Camp Collins was built to protect travelers and settlers along the Colorado stretch of the Overland Trail. Fort Collins was originally founded as a military outpost for the U.S. Army in 1864. The city saw its first population boom, and by 1872 the site of the former fort had a small hotel, a general store, post office, a mill, and a school. Fort Collins was incorporated as a town in 1873. The city of Fort Collins has a deep history and agricultural influence. After the Colorado Central Railroad arrived in 1877, the city became a thriving agricultural center. Colorado Agricultural and Mining College held its first classes in 1879, and in 1957 the school was renamed Colorado State University, but it still certainly maintains its agricultural influence. During the 1960s, Colorado State University's enrollment doubled and Fort Collins expanded rapidly. Today, the city of Fort Collins continues to thrive and is still a popular college town. In 2015, Fort Collins was the fourth most populous city in Colorado and had a population of 158,600 people. And for the past 13 years, Fort Collins has been my home. To better understand hydraulic fracturing and its impacts, I'm going to explain a brief background in natural gas. Natural gas is considered one of the most useful resources in the United States. Today, natural gas is used for generating electricity for industrial use, residential, and commercial use. Natural gas is important for manufacturing steel, glass, paper, clothing, and many other goods. It also provides raw materials for plastics, paints, fertilizers, dyes, medicines, explosives, and is important to the chemical industry. Natural gas is found in 33 states, and Colorado is a major producer. Colorado's natural gas production is growing. However, the process used to extract natural gas can contaminate ground and surface water and damage the environment and may be a public health concern in general. One of the more controversial methods for extracting natural gas is called hydraulic fracturing. Hydraulic fracturing is a process that results in the creation of fractures deep within shale rocks. Fracking enables the extraction of natural gas from rock formations deep below the Earth's surface. The process includes high pressure injection of water, sand, and concoction of chemicals to allow gas to flow to the well. After the fracturing process, some of the fluids and chemicals remain underground, and these fluids may include hazardous chemicals such as biocides, diesel fuel, acids, metals, ethylene glycol, corrosion inhibitors, and other chemicals. When these chemicals are trapped underground, they can seep into and contaminate drinking water supplies. Following hydraulic fracturing, fluids that return to the surface are referred to as flowback. These fluids include all of the water and chemicals used to frack a well and are very dangerous. The flowback must be transported and stored in special facilities. Spills can easily occur during transportation and the disposal process. It's important to point out that hydraulic fracturing and drilling are not the same thing. First comes drilling of the well, and then comes the hydraulic fracturing. However, when wells are drilled to access gas deposits, poor construction, well blowouts, and uncertain geological conditions can lead to contamination of aquifers, streams, and water wells. Old, poorly plugged wells, or those with aging concrete, can also lead to contamination of water supplies. The environmental impacts of hydraulic fracturing include the potential contamination of groundwater and air quality because of migration of gases and chemicals that come to the surface. The main pollutant related to hydraulic fracturing is methane emissions that come from the wells during fracturing. Methane gradually breaks down in the atmosphere, forming carbon dioxide. After fracturing a well, it may create new fractures that intersect natural geologic faults, and a high-pressure injection of fracking fluids can get into these natural faults. These fluids then travel along that fault and into freshwater aquifers or to the surface. These chemicals used during hydraulic fracturing perform many different functions. Although there are dozens to hundreds of chemicals, there are a limited number that are routinely used. Once again, some of these chemicals are biocides, diesel fuels, acids, heavy metals, and so on. But a full list of chemical disclosure can be accessed on the fracfocus.org website. The amount of water used for fracking each well will vary widely, especially by region. In northern Colorado, fracking each well can use more than 8 or 9 million gallons of water. It is estimated that 20 to 40% of the millions of gallons of fracking fluid remain underground. Not only does fracking strain water supplies, especially in drought-stricken areas, but that water is then contaminated with the chemicals that are used in fracking. The containment of fracking fluids is one of the most critical elements in prevention of water contamination. The failure of a tank, pit liner, or flow line carrying the fluid can result in a release of contaminated materials directly into surface and groundwater. These spills can damage the environment and can be quite costly to clean up. One of the biggest concerns of hydraulic fracturing for the communities is the risk of spills and unintended releases of fracking fluids. Local communities such as Fort Collins should have the ability to ban hydraulic fracturing operations within city limits. Since 2011, there have been 11 incidences of spills and unintended releases of fracking fluids and oil within the Fort Collins area, and the most recent was October 27, 2016, where a release of 140 to 150 BBLS of oil occurred at the Fort Collins tank battery due to a valve failure. A BBLS is an oil barrel, which is equivalent to about 42 gallons. And so that's about 6,300 gallons of oil that was spilled. The leak was discovered at approximately 1:15, and the cleanup process was recorded as ending at 7:30. The fcgov.com website compiled and provides a detailed list of the other spills near Fort Collins. On January 17th, 125 barrels of production water was spilled and 120 barrels was recovered. On May 28, 2015, it's estimated that approximately 450 barrels of production water was spilled. That's 18,900 gallons. On May 16, 2015, there was a spill in Fort Collins that was approximately 992 feet from surface water, 302 feet from wetlands, 303 feet from the nearest occupied building, and 600 feet from the nearest well. As I said, there have been at least 11 spills in Fort Collins since 2011, and in my paper I detail each specific incident. I try to include information about how much oil and fracking fluid was spilled, how much spilled material was recovered, and any cleanup efforts and any repairs that occurred. But to save time, I'm just going to leave it. But it's important to keep in mind that since 2013, when the ban on fracking would have been in effect, there have been 5 or 6 spills since then that would have been prevented had the ban been in place. Another important point to keep in mind is that Colorado makes a legal distinction between surface property rights and subsurface mineral rights. And real estate transactions may or may not include mineral rights. There is no law requiring the owners to tell buyers about the disposition of mineral rights, and they can be sold, leased, or retained by the previous owner. There have been many cases in which a buyer did not realize the previous owner had leased the mineral rights to energy companies. In Colorado, to obtain the right to drill under private property, an energy firm leases the mineral rights from the Federal Bureau of Land Management. If that lease is granted, the company can drill without the surface property owner's permission. It's clear that there's numerous concerns associated with the extraction of natural gas used in hydraulic fracturing. In November 2013, the residents of Fort Collins were presented with a ballot initiative called Question 2A. The measure established an ordinance prohibiting for 5 years the use of hydraulic fracturing and the storage of any waste products associated with fracking in the city limits. The measure was on a ballot through a citizen initiative petition. The ordinance also called for studies and research on whether there are, in fact, harmful effects that might come from fracking. The residents of Fort Collins voted to approve the initiative and place a 5-year moratorium on fracking. There were 20,136 votes for yes, or 55.36%, compared to 6,235 votes for no, or 44.64%. It's clear that the residents of Fort Collins do not want fracking or storage of fracking fluids within the city. At this point, the risks of fracking are pretty well understood, but I have also provided several examples of spills and releases of fracking fluids within the last 5 years in or very near Fort Collins. We as residents of Fort Collins should be the ones to decide which policies are decided by local governments and which should be decided by the state, not the oil and gas industry. It's critical to a functional society and democracy that we as residents have a say on what's best for our communities. After the residents of Fort Collins passed a voter-approved ban on fracking and the storage of fracking fluids, the city was sued by the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. Lower courts in Larimer County overturned the ban, so Fort Collins took their case to the Colorado Court of Appeals, asking it to restore the ban and moratorium. The Court of Appeals asked the Colorado Supreme Court to rule. In a unanimous decision, the Colorado Supreme Court ruled against the city of Fort Collins, saying the ban was invalid and unenforceable because it was preempted by state law. The opinion of the court was delivered by Justice Gabriel. Regardless of how safe drilling and fracking a well is, and regardless of how many precautions and safeguards are taken, there is simply no way to completely prevent blowout spills and other unintended releases of fracking fluids. When it comes to the possible containment of ground and surface water and other potential health effects within communities, those communities should have the ability to determine what industrial activities should take place in that community. The oil and gas industry is extremely powerful, and with near endless resources, it has the ability to make sure state law dictates that oil and gas is regulated at a state level and not local. The Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission is responsible for promoting energy development in Colorado, but it tends to favor drillers because they generate revenue for state coffers. Between 2008 and 2019, Colorado estimates it will earn about $2.7 billion from energy extraction. The Colorado Supreme Court ruling is an example which places the profits of corporations before the will of the people. Let me be clear that I'm not against fracking, and I enjoy many of the amenities that hydraulic fracturing provides, like cheaper gasoline. But I believe that local communities should have the ability to ban hydraulic fracturing. Obviously, not every city in Colorado wants to ban fracking. Some counties like Weld, our neighbors to the east, their economy depends heavily on the oil and gas industry and provides many jobs to the residents. So I don't see that county or the cities within that county voting to ban fracking. However, other cities that don't want to deal with the hazards and health concerns of fracking should have the option to ban it either through city council or voter-approved initiatives. The Colorado Supreme Court may have applied the law as it is written, but it needs to change a state law to allow local governments to regulate oil and gas operations. We need to stand up to the powerful oil and gas industry and pass initiatives that give local authorities the power to regulate oil and gas operations that fall within city limits. The fact that state law dictates that oil and gas should be regulated at the state level is just evidence of the lobbying efforts by special interest groups within the oil and gas industry. Since it directly impacts the people, it should be the will of the residents within a community who determine regulations for oil and gas drilling. Fort Collins can't appeal a decision to a higher court like the U.S. Supreme Court because oil and gas regulation is not a matter of federal law. This is little comfort for other communities in Colorado, but the good news for the residents of Fort Collins is despite the Supreme Court ruling, the fracking of new wells is unlikely to take place in Fort Collins. First, the low price of oil doesn't provide much incentive for oil and gas companies to begin new development. Also, the available oil and gas below Fort Collins isn't as plentiful or easy accessible as what's available in nearby Weld County. The debate over hydraulic fracturing and regulation isn't over, but at least there won't be any new fracking in Fort Collins anytime soon.